Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Welcome to the Jai and Bhava show. Here we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam again because it's pure nectar. So like that. Where are we reading from?
Canto 1, Chapter 13, Text 8.
And the chapter is entitled
Dhritarashtra quits home.
Dhritarashtra quits home. Yes, still thinking about quitting home. Okay. Text number 8. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Text 8. Maharaj Yudhishthira said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us along with our mother from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson." Purport. Due to Pandu's death at an early age, his minor children and widow were the object of special care by all the elderly members of the family, especially Bhishmadev and Mahatma Vidura. Vidura was more or less partial to the Pandavas due to their political position. Although Dhritarashtra was equally careful for the minor children of Maharaj Pandu, he was one of the intriguing parties who wanted to wash away the descendants of Pandu and replace them by raising his own sons to become the rulers of the kingdom. Mahatma Vidura could follow this intrigue of Dhritarashtra and company, and therefore, even though he was a faithful servitor of his eldest brother, Dhritarashtra, he did not like his political ambition for the sake of his own sons. He was therefore very careful about the protection of the Pandavas and their widow mother. Thus he was, so to speak, partial to the Pandavas, preferring them to the sons of Dhritarashtra, although both of them were equally affectionate in his ordinary eyes. He was equally affectionate to both the camps of nephews in the sense that he always chastised Duryodhana for his intriguing policy against his cousins. He always criticized his elder brother for his policy of encouragement to his sons, and at the same time he was always alert and giving special protection to the Pandavas. All these different activities of Vidura within the palace politics made him well known as partial to the Pandavas. Maharaj Yudhishthira has referred to the past history of Vidura before his going away from home for a prolonged pilgrim's journey. Maharaj Yudhishthira reminded him that he was equally kind and partial to his grown-up nephews, even after the Battle of Kurukshetra, a great family disaster. You could call it that, couldn't you?
Definitely a disaster, family disaster. Before the Battle of Kurukshetra, Dhritarashtra's policy was peaceful annihilation of his nephews, and therefore he ordered Purochana to build a house of lac at Varanavat. And when the building was finished, Dhritarashtra desired that his brother's family live there for some time. When the Pandavas were going there in the presence of all the members of the royal family, Vidura tactfully gave instructions to the Pandavas about the future plan of Dhritarashtra. This is specifically described in the Mahabharata. He indirectly hinted, even a weapon not made of steel or any other material element can be more than sharp enough to kill an enemy, and he who knows this is never killed. That is to say, he hinted that the party of the Pandavas was being sent to Varanavat to be killed, and thus he warned Yudhishthira to be very careful in their new residential palace. He also gave indications of fire and said that fire cannot extinguish the soul but can annihilate the material body. But one who protects the soul can live. Kunti could not follow such indirect conversation between Maharaj Yudhishthira and Vidura, and thus she inquired from her son about the purport of their conversation. Yudhishthira replied that from the talks of Vidura it was understood that there was a hint of fire in the house where they were proceeding. Later on, Vidura came in disguise to the Pandavas and informed them that the housekeeper was going to set fire to the house on the 14th night of the waning moon. It was an intrigue of Dhritarashtra that the Pandavas might die altogether with their mother, and by his warning the Pandavas escaped through a tunnel underneath the earth, so that their escape was also unknown to Dhritarashtra. So much so that after setting the fire, The Kauravas were so certain of the death of the Pandavas that Dhritarashtra performed the last rites of death with great cheerfulness. And during the mourning period, all the members of the palace became overwhelmed with lamentation. But Vidura did not become so, because of his knowledge that the Pandavas were alive somewhere. There are many such instances of calamities, and in each of them Vidura gave protection to the Pandavas on one hand, and on the other he tried to restrain his brother Dhritarashtra from such intriguing policies. Therefore, he was always partial to the Pandavas, just as a bird protects its eggs by its wing.
Text 9. While travelling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood at such holy places and pilgrimage sites? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? Purport. Vidura went from the palace to detach himself from household affairs, especially political intrigues. As referred to herein before, he was practically insulted by Duryodhans calling him a son of a Shudrani, although it is not out of place to talk loosely in the case of one's grandmother. Vidura's mother, although a Shudrani, was the grandmother of Duryodhan, and funny talks are sometimes allowed between grandmother and grandchildren. But because the remark was an actual fact, it was unpalatable talk to Vidura, and it was accepted as a direct insult. Interesting, because it's a fact, so why are you getting upset? But if it wasn't a fact, then it wouldn't be like talks between grandchildren, grandmother. It would be offensive.
No, that's what they're saying. If it's a joke, that a grandmother and a grandson can have funny talks, and that's allowed. You can, have a little banter. But because the remark was a fact, it was unpalatable,
But it is a fact.
Yeah, it is a fact.
So why is he getting... He therefore decided to quit his paternal house and prepare for the renounced order of life. This preparatory stage is called Vanapras Ashram, or retired life for travelling and visiting the holy places on the surface of the earth. In the holy places of India, like Vrindavan, Hardwar, Jagannath Puri and Prayag, there are many great devotees, and there are still free kitchen houses for persons who desire to advance spiritually. Maharaj Yudhishthira was inquisitive to learn whether Vidura maintained himself by the mercy of the free kitchen houses, chatras.
Free kitchen houses. My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily, all this famous verse. Bhavad Vida Bhagavatas Tirtha Bhuta Swayam Vibho Tirti Kurvanti Tirtani Swanta Stena Gadabrita. My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. Because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. Purport. The personality of Godhead is omnipresent by his diverse potencies everywhere, just as the power of electricity is distributed everywhere within space. Similarly, the Lord's omnipresence is perceived and manifested by his unalloyed devotees like Vidura, just as electricity is manifested in an electric bulb. A pure devotee like Vidura always feels the presence of the Lord everywhere. He sees everything in the potency of the Lord, and the Lord in everything. The holy places all over the earth are meant for purifying the polluted consciousness of the human being by an atmosphere surcharged with the presence of the Lord's unalloyed devotees. If anyone visits a holy place, he must search out the pure devotees residing in such holy places. Take lessons from them. Try to apply such instructions in practical life, and thus gradually prepare oneself for the ultimate salvation, going back to Godhead. To go to some holy place of pilgrimage does not mean only to take bath in the Ganges or the Jamuna, or just visit temples situated in those places. One should also find representation of Vidura. One should also find representatives of Vidura who have no desire in life save and except to serve the personality of Godhead. The personality of Godhead is always with such pure devotees. because of their unalloyed service, which is without any tinge of fruitive action or utopian speculation. They are in the actual service of the Lord, specifically by the process of hearing and chanting. The pure devotees hear from the authorities and chant, sing, and write of the glories of the Lord. Mahamuni Vyasadeva heard from Narada, and then he chanted in writing. Shukadeva Goswami studied from his father, and he described it to Parikshit. That is the way of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, by their actions, the pure devotees of the Lord can render any place into a place of pilgrimage, and the holy places are worth the name only on their account. Such pure devotees are able to rectify the polluted atmosphere of any place, and what to speak of a holy place rendered unholy by the questionable actions of interested persons who try to adopt a professional life at the cost of the reputation of a holy place.
Text 11. My dear uncle, you must have visited Dwarka. In that holy place are our friends and well-wishers, the descendants of Yadu, who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Sri Krishna. You might have seen them or heard about them. Are they all living happily in their abodes? Purport. The particular word Krishna Devata, i.e. those who are always wrapped in the service of the Lord Krishna, is significant. The Yadavas and the Pandavas, who were always wrapped in the thought of the Lord Krishna and his different transcendental activities, were all pure devotees of the Lord, like Vidura. Vidura left home in order to devote himself completely to the service of the Lord, but the Pandavas and the Yadavas were always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna. Thus there is no difference in their pure devotional qualities. Either remaining at home or leaving home, the real qualification of a pure devotee is to become wrapped in the thought of Krishna favourably, i.e. knowing well that Lord Krishna is the absolute personality of Godhead. Kamsa, Jarasan, Shishupal and other demons like them were also always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna, but they were absorbed in a different way, namely unfavourably, of thinking him to be a powerful man only. Therefore, Kamsa and Shishupal are not on the same level as pure devotees like Vidura, the Pandavas and the Yadavas. Maharaj Yudhishthira was also always wrapped in the thought of Lord Krishna and his associates at Dwarka. Otherwise, he could not have asked all about them from Vidura. Maharaj Yudhishthira was therefore on the same level of devotion as Vidura, although engaged in the state affairs of the kingdom of God.
Okay, text 12. Thus, being questioned by Maharaj Yudhishthira, Mahatma Vidura gradually described everything he had personally experienced, except news of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. 13. Compassionate Mahatma Vidura could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. Therefore, he did not disclose this unpalatable and unbearable incident, because calamities come of their own accord. According to the Niti Shastra civic laws, one should not speak an unpalatable truth to cause distress to others. Distress comes upon us in its own way by the laws of nature, so one should not aggravate it by propaganda. For a compassionate soul like Vidura, especially in his dealings with the beloved Pandavas, it was almost impossible to disclose any unpalatable piece of news like the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. Therefore, he purposefully refrained from it. Interesting point.
Text 14. Thus Mahatma Vidura, being treated just like a godly person by his kinsmen, remained there for a certain period just to rectify the mentality of his eldest brother, and in this way bring happiness to all the others. Purport. Saintly persons like Vidura must be treated as well as a denizen from heaven. In those days, denizens of heavenly planets used to visit homes like that of Maharaj Yudhishthira, and sometimes persons like Arjuna and others used to visit higher planets. Nowadays, a spaceman who can travel unrestrictedly, not only within the material universes, but also in the spiritual universes. Even Narada used to visit the palace of Maharaj Yudhishthira, and what to speak of other celestial demigods. It is only the spiritual culture of the people concerned that makes interplanetary travel possible, even in the present body. Maharaj Yudhishthira therefore received Vidura in the manner of reception offered to the demigods.
Mahatma Vidura had already adopted the renounced order of life, and therefore he did not return to his paternal palace to enjoy some material comforts. He accepted out of his own mercy what was offered to him by Maharaj Yudhishthira, for the purpose of living in the palace was to deliver his elder brother Dhritarashtra, who was too much materially attached. Dhritarashtra lost all his state and descendants in the fight with Maharaj Yudhishthira, and still, due to his sense of helplessness, he did not feel ashamed to accept the charity and hospitality of Maharaj Yudhishthira. On the part of Maharaj Yudhishthira, it was quite in order to maintain his uncle in a befitting manner, but acceptance of such magnanimous hospitality by Dhritarashtra was not at all desirable. He accepted it because he thought that there was no alternative. Vidura particularly came to enlighten Dhritarashtra and to give him a lift to the higher status of spiritual cognition. It is the duty of enlightened souls to deliver the fallen ones, and Vidura came for that reason. But talks of spiritual enlightenment are so refreshing that while instructing Dhritarashtra, Vidura attracted the attention of all the members of the family, and all of them took pleasure in hearing him patiently. This is the way of spiritual realization. The message should be heard attentively, and if spoken by a realized soul, it will act on the dormant heart of the conditioned soul, and by continuously hearing, one can attain the perfect stage of self-realization.
Text 15. As long as Vidura played the part of a Shudra being cursed by Manduka Muni, Aryama officiated at the post of Yamaraj to punish those who committed sinful acts. Purport. Vidura, born in the womb of a Shudra woman, was forbidden even to be part of royal heritage along with his brothers Dhritarashtra and Pandu. Then how could he occupy the post of a preacher to instruct such learned kings and Kshatriyas as Dhritarashtra and Maharaj Yudhishthira? The first answer is that even though it is accepted that he was a Shudra by birth, because he renounced the world for spiritual enlightenment by the authority of Rishi Maitreya and was thoroughly educated by him in transcendental knowledge, he was quite competent to occupy the post of an acharya or spiritual preceptor. According to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, anyone who is conversant in the transcendental knowledge or the science of God, be he a Brahmana or a Shudra, a householder or sannyasi, is eligible to become a spiritual master. Even in the ordinary moral codes maintained by Chanakya Pandit, the great politician and moralist, there is no harm in taking lessons from a person who may be by birth less than a Shudra. This is one part of the answer. The other is that Vidura was not actually a Shudra. He was to play the part of a so-called Shudra for 100 years, being cursed by Manduka Muni. He was the incarnation of Yamaraj, one of the 12 Mahajans, on the level with such exalted personalities as Brahma, Narada, Shiva, Kapila, Bhishma, Prahlad, etc. Being a Mahajan, it is the duty of Yamaraj to preach the cult of devotion to the people of the world, as Narada, Brahma, and other Mahajans do. But Yamaraj is always busy in his plutonic kingdom, punishing the doers of sinful acts. Yamaraj is deputed by the Lord to a particular planet, some hundreds of thousands of miles away from the planet of Earth, to take away the corrupt souls after death and convict them in accordance with their respective sinful activities. Thus, Yamaraj has very little time to take leave from his responsible office of punishing the wrongdoers. There are more wrongdoers than righteous men. Therefore, Yamaraj has to do more work than other demigods who are also authorized agents of the Supreme Lord. But he wanted to preach the glories of the Lord, and therefore, by the will of the Lord, he was cursed by Manduka Muni to come into the world in the incarnation of Vidura and work very hard as a great devotee. Such a devotee is neither a Shudra nor a Brahmana. He is transcendental to such divisions of mundane society, just as the personality of Godhead assumes his incarnation as a hog, but he is neither a hog nor a Brahma. He is above all mundane creatures. The Lord and his different authorized devotees sometimes have to play the role of many lower creatures to claim the conditioned souls, but both the Lord and his pure devotees are always in the transcendental position. When Yamaraj thus incarnated himself as Vidura, his post was officiated by Aryama, one of the many sons of Kashyap and Aditi. The Adityas are sons of Aditi, and there are 12 Adityas. Aryama is one of the 12 Adityas, and therefore it was quite possible for him to take charge of the office of Yamaraj during his 100 years' absence in the form of Vidura. The conclusion is that Vidura was never a Shudra, but was greater than the purest type of Brahmana.
Plutonic. Plutonic means from the underworld, governed over by Pluto. So Greek mythology, Pluto is the lord of the underworld. So interesting that Prabhupada uses that word. I guess if it was Prabhupada. Translation. Having won his kingdom and observed the birth of one grandson competent to continue the noble tradition of his family, Maharaj Yudhisthira reigned peacefully and enjoyed uncommon opulence in cooperation with his younger brothers, who were all expert administrators to the common people. Purport. Both Maharaj Yudhisthira and Arjuna were unhappy from the beginning of the battle of Kurukshetra. But even though they were unwilling to kill their own men in the fight, it had to be done as a matter of duty, for it was planned by the supreme will of Lord Sri Krishna. After the battle, Maharaj Yudhisthira was unhappy over such mass killings. Practically, there was none to continue the Kuru dynasty after them, the Pandavas. The only remaining hope was the child in the womb of his daughter-in-law Uttara, and he was also attacked by Ashwatthama. He being the baby in the womb, not she. But by the grace of the Lord, the child was saved. So after the settlement of all disturbing conditions and the re-establishment of the peaceful order of the state, and after seeing the surviving child, Parikshit, well satisfied, Maharaj Yudhisthira felt some relief as a human being, although he had very little attraction for material happiness, which is always illusory and temporary.
Text 17. Insurmountable eternal time imperceptibly overcomes those who are too much attached to family affairs and are always engrossed in their thought. Purport. I am now happy. I have everything in order. My bank balance is quite enough. I can now give my children enough estate. I am now successful. The poor beggar sannyasi depend on God, but they come to beg from me. Therefore I am more than the Supreme Lord. These are some of the thoughts which engross the insanely attached householder, who is blind to the passing of eternal time. Our duration of life is measured, and no one is able to enhance it even by a second against the scheduled time ordained by the Supreme Will. Such valuable time, especially for the human being, should be cautiously spent, because even a second passed away imperceptibly cannot be replaced, even in exchange for thousands of golden coins amassed by hard labor. Every second of human life is meant for making an ultimate solution to the problems of life, i.e. repetition of birth and death, and revolving in the cycle of 8,400,000 different species of life. The material body, which is subject to birth and death, diseases and old age, is the cause of all sufferings of the living being. Otherwise, the living being is eternal, he is never born, nor does he ever die. Foolish persons forget this problem. They do not know at all how to solve the problems of life, but become engrossed in temporary family affairs, not knowing that eternal time is passing away imperceptibly, and that their measured duration of life is diminishing every second, without any solution to the big problem, namely repetition of birth and death, disease and old age. This is called illusion.
But such illusion cannot work on one who is awake in the devotional service of the Lord. Yudhisthira Maharaj and his brothers, the Pandavas, were all engaged in the service of Lord Shri Krishna, and they had very little attraction for the illusory happinesses of this material world. As we have discussed previously, Maharaj Yudhisthira was fixed in the service of Lord Mukunda, the Lord who can award salvation. And therefore he had no attraction even for such comforts of life as are available in the kingdom of heaven, because even the happiness obtained on the planet Brahmaloka is also temporary and illusory. Because the living being is eternal, he can be happy only in the eternal abode of the kingdom of God, Paravyoma, from which no one returns to this region of repeated birth and death, disease, and old age. Therefore, any comfort of life or any material happiness which does not warrant an eternal life is but illusion for the eternal living being. One who understands this factually is learned, and such a learned person can sacrifice any amount of material happiness to achieve the desired goal known as Brahmasukam, or absolute happiness. Real transcendentalists are hungry for this happiness, and as a hungry man cannot be made happy by all comforts of life minus foodstuffs, so the man hungry for eternal absolute happiness cannot be satisfied by any amount of material happiness. Therefore, the instruction described in this verse cannot be applied to Maharaj Yudhisthira or his brothers and mother. It was meant for persons like Dhritarashtra, for whom Vidura came especially to impart lessons. What do you think? One more or finish here?
I think it's time to finish.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada Ki
Jai.